Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of City's Blood Podcast. I'm Phil Lucero.
And I'm Alexis Terevko.
And happy Thanksgiving.
Gobble, gobble, gobble.
So this is the time of year when all the families get together and have great food.
That's right.
And try not to get into fist fights.
Or
shoot each other.
Or stab each other, or...
I recall last year us doing an episode where...
over a football game.
It was over a football game.
So
ended up in tragedy.
Well, I mean, we had that morning game this morning, Phil. It's really good, wasn't it?
Oh, fantastic.
Right?
Yeah, I really got into it.
Really can't believe how great that Bears-Lions game was.
So, today we're going to talk a little bit about the history of Thanksgiving, on what's true and what's not true.
Everything.
Well, what were you told? I mean, growing up in school, I know every kid made those paper hats or the fake little Indian headdresses.
Oh yeah, because you traced your hand and you could make the turkey. Let's see. I always remember first Thanksgiving was 16 something, and they brought both parties, the indigenous and the Brits that were now Americans, brought their own fair share of food, and they combined it into one giant table and celebrated being Americans together.
And that was the first Thanksgiving.
That was that I was always told the first Thanksgiving was.
And what I've always been amazed is how a wonderful story like that, ended so tragically for the Native Americans. We're talking about 111 million people wiped out. Mm-hmm. And have you ever heard of the paper genocide?
No. I mean, maybe I have. I just don't know it referred to as that.
Well, in addition to the actual genocide of the Native American, and that the reduction numbers were staggering. I mean, it went from something like they thought there were roughly 112 million, and 111 million of them were killed. You had roughly a million left by the turn of the 1900 kind of type numbers we're talking here. This is a staggering numbers amount of people that were just slaughtered, peaceful people, or killed by the diseases that we brought. Right. But mostly slaughtered. Well, in addition to the physical genocide, the actual murder of all these people, this doctor who was practicing eugenics, or the father of eugenics, basically got in control somehow of, it was an elected official. And when Native Americans were born, children, he would reclassify them. He would either put them white, black, or mulatto. And so they wouldn't have a history of, it wouldn't say Native American, it wouldn't say Sioux, it wouldn't say, Cheyenne, it wouldn't. So, and this has been going on for hundreds of years, basically almost from day one. Right. And so you have entire generations, of people who have no idea who they are. You steal somebody's heritage, you steal their history when they don't have anywhere to look back. They think they're something, but they're actually something else. It's only nowadays that, through 23andMe that you can actually have these things checked.
Yeah, these DNA test type things.
Yeah, but it's
because I have a friend that what is he? I think they always said they were Sioux. And because of, I think, 23andMe, they actually found out they were like Chippewa or something. Yeah.
At least they were Native American.
Yeah.
I was always told that my grandmother, my mother's mother, and her brother, had a certain amount of Native American in them. Cherokee, because they were from Georgia. Mm-hmm. And my grandmother and my uncle both looked like they could have had, Native American. And according to, the stereotypical images that we were brought up with. Oh, yeah. One in particular I had in my head was the commercial of the crying Indian. Right. Or the crying Native American. Yeah. Over the garbage litter. Yeah. Anybody from our generation is going to remember this commercial.
Very famous commercial.
Absolutely.
It was a Super Bowl, like one of the first Super Bowl commercials, wasn't it?
It probably was. It's but everybody from our generation has seen this one, and you know, they his name was Chief Iron Eyes Cody, and he was in dozens of films, and one of the most famous Native American actors of his time period. Only he wasn't really Native American. He was actually Italian, and he'd come from New Orleans, I believe, and there was a lot of anti-Italian American sentiment around Italians in the turn of the century in New Orleans. So much so that there was a mass lynching there. The largest mass lynching in U.S. history supposedly was there, and it was 11 Italians. 19 had been tried for the murder of their chief of police. 11 were acquitted. The 11 that were acquitted were rounded up at a lynch mob. Actually, not rounded up. The lynch mob stormed the prison, broke down the walls, took the 11 out, and lynched them all.
Wow.
So that's the largest lynching in U.S. history. However, it's not the largest mass hanging in U.S. history.
Right.
And the difference between a lynching and a hanging is that one's legal and one's not.
Right.
So,
well,
in a lot of ways, I guess the largest mass hanging would be more shameful.
Right. Well, I mean, and especially who did it, who ordered it.
Who ordered it, absolutely. Well, it's... This is a tragic story, and the reason why it has something to do, what it has to do with Thanksgiving is that the first official Thanksgiving in this country was, I believe, 1863, and it was.
That's when they were trying to bring.
It was ordered
the country
together. Well, it was the height of the Civil War,
right?
And it was also the start of the Indian Wars, the Native American Wars. In Minnesota, there were some serious casualties that had been taken by the Sioux. The Sioux were being, cornered into areas where there were no game, and so they were starving.
Right.
And they lashed out, and they went back at these settlers who were brutal people, and they killed 800 soldiers or settlers. So the backlash of this is that God knows how many thousands of Native Americans were actually slaughtered in the process, but around 307 of them were actually sentenced to death by an army tribunal, or right. You know what I'm trying to say here.
Yeah, tribunal.
A general basically did it.
Yeah.
And so President Abraham Lincoln said 307 is too many, and he was an attorney himself. Mm-hmm. And so he reviewed each one of those 307 cases and brought it down to 38. And those 38 Sioux warrior were hung all at once in is it 1892?
No,
1862. It was during Lincoln's. Yeah. These
could be 1892. Lincoln wasn't around then.
I took notes on this because unfortunately I had not known this. The Italian thing and the Native American thing, the reason why I go from one into the other, I mean, it kind of worked with the tale of Chief Iron Eyes Cody. Mm-hmm. It was a nice segue. But the comparison, like I said, is that one's legal, one's not. I always, I'd heard for years, at least from the 90s, that, the largest mass hanging was these Italians. That's not true at all. That was the largest mass lynching, supposedly. Mm-hmm. The recorded ones. We know there probably were a lot more than that in the South. That maybe went unrecorded.
That's probably a high possibility.
Yeah. So the fact is the comparison of the two, that 38 of these Sioux were hung all at once on December 26th. This is the day after Christmas. Mm-hmm. So December 26th, 1862, in Mankato, Minnesota, 4,000 people gathered to watch the public hanging of 38 Sioux warriors. And that is the largest mass hanging in U.S. history. And a year later, Abraham Lincoln ordered the first official Thanksgiving as a U.S. holiday. Right. And supposedly those were because they were having Thanksgivings every time they had won a battle with either the South or the Indians that they were having during their skirmishes. And so rather than having them every week, they turned it into one big holiday, and we're going to have it once a year. It was a thanks for that. Supposedly there was a Thanksgiving before that by our first president, by George Washington, our first federal president, George Washington. And supposedly that was for the in the 1780s for the conclusion, our victory over England and the end of that war, and then to give thanks. That didn't become a yearly thing, no, I guess. I think it was not officially anyway.
Yeah, no, it wasn't really. Lincoln was when it became a thing.
Yeah, and so
I think it was the one in 16 whatever. Then it was like sometime in like 1680 there was one.
Well, there was the 1621 was supposedly the one in Massachusetts.
And like 1630, because it was like 8 or 9 years later they did another one.
1637, I believe, is the one you're thinking of, and that was actually to commemorate the slaughtering, of a 700. Was it PQ or Pico? I'm going to mispronounce that name, and I really apologize for that because I've heard people pronounce it several ways.
I think it's PQ,
Pequot, something like that.
I think
that.
I apologize for being Caucasian.
Yeah, that tribe was slaughtered. 700 people of it, men, women, and children. A longhouse burned with women and children inside of it. Just horrible atrocity. And then afterwards they went and they gave thanks for their victory over and for basically annihilating an entire village. That was, they said, a lot of people say that was the first real Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
The 1621, there's arguments on whether that ever really happened. Supposedly a year before that, there were a handful of these starving settlers that were really having a rough time of it.
Right.
And the reason why the Wampanoag helped them is because they had enemies and they wanted allies. And so they saw that, they were from previous experiences because, that wasn't the first time the white man landed in North America. They had been there years before.
Right.
And so he knew that there were more that would be coming. And he needed an ally against his enemies, these other tribes. And so it's the enemy of my enemy is my friend kind of thing. Right. They offered protection and here's how you do food. And, it was like a frenemies, I guess, maybe kind of relationship at best.
Well, no one was going to trust each other, even though they were trusting each other.
Yeah. I think the Native Americans had a lot more to fear, especially by that point, because
at that point the white man had been in America for basically 200 years.
Well, 1492 was the West Indies, right? Well, a few years later, Amerigo Vespucci, hits Florida. The mainland is discovered. I think it was, at best late 1500s that my history is falling apart.
Right.
That was it Hudson Bay or that whole discovery?
Yeah.
That basically, the Northeast started to become explored.
Well, I think even before that, I think the Vikings had come over.
Well, yeah, but that was 1,000 years before, and people didn't really confirm that until like the 1970s. So it's as far as the holiday tradition of Thanksgiving.
Well, no, I'm just saying if they were there, and they probably did see them at some point.
Oh, I'm sure they did. But you're talking about tribes that have had almost no written and really no written. They had oral history. And so there may have been some, if they had any experience at all, it would have been in trade with the tribes from the South who had run in with the Spanish first. Because the Spanish were extremely cruel, just as the English turned out to be too. But anyways, this whole meeting between them may or may not have happened. They supposedly didn't have turkey when they were there. There's the idea that 5 deer were brought and everybody had food and a good time. It's possible. It may not be possible. If it were a religious ceremony, if it were a religious giving thanks, then these being Puritans would actually probably be fasting. Yeah. The fact that it was a harvest festival, they probably just never called it a Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
A lot of this is, 200 years of branding after the fact and trying to make a holiday out of it, trying to sell things like pumpkin pie and turkeys.
Well, I think at this point it's 400 years of lies.
Yeah.
Almost. I mean, 1621.
And there's a great book called Lies My Teacher Told Me that goes really into this. But basically, yeah, Thanksgiving to us, is a family holiday, and we have a very nice story that, that we teach, third graders. But to Native Americans, it's got to be maybe the worst holiday there is. That or Columbus Day. I mean, you want to pick those two.
I would probably go with neck and neck.
Yeah, they represent the beginning of the end of their culture, and in many ways.
And I think too is that the lies, even with that, have been told so many times that what would have been had, like venison. I think we said earlier, eel.
Yeah.
Probably some vegetables.
Yeah.
Corn.
Well, cranberries were possible because I grew up in back east, and they had cranberry bogs there.
Yeah.
So it's. I don't think for me the food thing isn't really the important of it. It's more of their relationship.
Well,
with
it. But I'm just saying that just from the food alone, they didn't have stuffing.
Yeah.
And
there was no butter,
potatoes,
no crust.
Right.
No potatoes were from South America, so they still hadn't been brought up to there. It's all of that is interesting.
Yeah.
I think what's really interesting is the tale of Squanto. He was suddenly out of nowhere appears a Native American who can speak perfect English.
Yeah.
And the reason was because Squanto was a slave. He had been captured in 1614 by the Spanish and brought to Spain, then sold to England to some lord or something, taught English, and then somehow made his way back.
Well, he got bought. He got bought again, or I don't know if he got bought, but he got freed to come back to America. So, somebody paid for him to come back.
So quite a story with this guy, and so when he comes back, though, his tribe is dead.
Yeah,
they had all been wiped out by smallpox or basically any number of diseases that the Europeans brought over with them.
Right.
And so here's a guy without a tribe, without anything, but the other tribes who have taken over those lands said, "All right, we have a need for a translator." But who knows how he was treated in that kind of thing. But then I've also heard that he almost planned not a mutiny, I guess like a mutiny to try to take over the tribe that had taken him in kind of thing. So Squanto is a real interesting story, but it isn't all, hearts and flowers and roses,
He wasn't taught English by a nice missionary.
Yeah. Suddenly everybody's friends, and then we're all having turkey and corn on the cob together, and life is great. The history of the United States, my God, it's bathed in blood. I had always heard the number 53 million Native Americans, but after doing a lot more research recently, like I said, it came up with that 111 million roughly is the number supposedly. And that's just astonishing. But
well, and I think too is that not that this makes it anywhere near okay, but the disease killed.
Well, yeah, the disease killed tons of it, but the brutality is, I guess, one of the biggest.
No, I'm just saying that. But if I don't know, let's say smallpox had never been a thing.
Yeah.
It was either that many more people would have been slaughtered, or maybe that many more people would have survived. Who knows? But it's always one of those things you never hear about the disease killing the Native Americans, other than we gave it to them in blankets.
Yeah, exactly. There's the blanket story, but you don't hear the numbers. However, when Sutter landed here, supposedly the entire village was wiped out because there had been a fur trading expedition a couple of years earlier that had brought smallpox through. Same thing back east. When those pilgrims were there, they were actually on the site of an old village that had been once occupied, and they'd all died from smallpox. And so that germ warfare, if you will, allowed us to just move into uninhabited, places because they're like, oh, nobody was there. Well, nobody's there because they were all dead. And then the ones that did survive, we just kept pushing them and pushing them and pushing them and then murdering them. Sand Creek, Wounded Knee,
we could probably be here for 2 hours talking about.
Absolutely. It's, I think
you could hear them.
I like the idea of the holiday to give thanks. I think the history of it needs to be kind of like, told and I don't know, maybe change the name of the holiday or something. It's
one of those things where I kind of throw it back to it's never going to happen.
Yeah.
They're never going to change the name, but the narrative can be changed. And it could be turned into a positive. You could still take it as this is a day where family and friends get together and celebrate having each other in their lives.
Yeah.
That's the thanks that you give. But to say that it's, to have I don't know what store grocery store I was in earlier today. They have like the pilgrim, like it's those paper cutouts, but you can move the arms. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
With the Native American, and they're like cutting up the turkey and
together.
Yeah, and I'm just like, that's not what happened.
No, that's not. It's a gross misrepresentation of the relationship between the settlers,
the indigenous and the white man that has been going on for 500 years.
Yeah, it's absolutely tragic.
That's, my friend, is an understatement.
Yeah. And we've been raised, then, I mean, I have to admit, in the 70s growing up, I was in a school play at like 5 years old where we had those, those little horses on a stick, on a broomstick things. Yeah, well, we had to have those, and I got to be one of the Native Americans running around. And, and we came out, to music and, rode the little stick horses around like a fake fire and a fake teepee. And then we all sat down and had a fake Thanksgiving with the Pilgrims. And I mean, like, as American as you could imagine that shit.
I think I might have been in that same play.
Right?
Just over here on this side of the country.
As a kid, the idea we get of that, and then everything else, with the Westerns that I grew up on anyway. I grew up on John Wayne's Westerns. And they were very simplistic and brutal.
Well, yeah, that was. Also they hadn't had anyone play a Native American in a movie probably until like 1990. When did Dances with Wolves come out?
Well, Dances with Wolves is a terrible representation, really.
No, I was saying though, but actual indigenous people playing indigenous people.
They did in some of John Ford's movies, I believe, and there's even a case where they're speaking their own language and nobody knows what they're really saying until 60 years later.
Right.
And there's a great movie, a documentary I saw on that, and they're basically cursing out the guy on camera in their own language. But
because there's one actor, and I'm going to look him up right now.
The first one I can think of is Chief Dan George in Little Big Man, which was 1970, and then he was also in The Outlaw Josie Wales. Now he was a great actor.
Who was it? What's his name?
Chief Dan George.
Oh, so the guy I'm always thinking about is Graham Greene.
Yeah,
he plays the Native American chief.
In the 90s, he was really, right?
Yeah, he was. Oh, no, he's still active today.
Does he?
Yeah, because he was on.
There's also the guy
Longmire. He was on Longmire.
There's also the guy from What was that? From One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. You remember him? The one who threw the thing through the window. He's okay. What's the Poltergeist Part 2?
Oh, you're good at things I probably haven't seen.
Okay.
I don't like scary movies.
Really?
No.
It's like Sonny. He doesn't like them either.
They scare me. I want to hide under the blankets.
Funny. And yet you're on the podcast.
Yeah, right.
All we talk about is gore.
I can deal with the real. I don't know. It's weird. Real life stuff I can deal with.
Yeah. Anybody want to watch a good movie that is pretty accurate in the representation of the slaughter? I think is Little Big Man with Dustin Hoffman, 1970. It's on Amazon Prime right now. I think you probably find that on some other channels, but
yeah, I'm sure somewhere.
This is a story where Dustin Hoffman's character as a child is captured by Native Americans.
Okay, yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Okay, and that story's been done in you know a lot of different premises, right? But it's him and his sister. This one has a comic tint to all the circumstances he finds himself in.
Right.
But Chief Dan George ends up being like his adoptive, Native American grandfather. And I love in the movie how it's the Cheyenne people, but in their own language, he says Cheyenne translates to the human beings.
That.
So throughout the rest of the movie, when he's referring to the Cheyenne, he's always calling them the human beings. So I went back and then I lived with the human beings again, and all these things, and it's a fantastic movie that way. I think
when you look at it through that light,
there's also a lot of horror that they show unflinchingly. The slaughter of women and children and babies, and you remember Soap? Okay, the TV show Soap. The guy who played, I think, Bert, the crazy blonde-haired guy.
Okay.
In the show, he plays General Custer in this movie.
Oh, wow.
And again, he's good at playing, was good at playing nuts. And,
right.
And he plays Custer like a nut, that he was, an arrogant, narcissistic, egomaniac nut. And it's a great movie. The whole premise of it is that it starts off with a man interviewing a 121-year-old man who claims to be the last living survivor of the Battle of Little Bighorn.
Okay.
And this is Dustin Hoffman's character, and so he takes him into the whole story, how he was captured, and how he kept ending up back and forth between Native American hands, and then and back with the Caucasians again.
Those good show that, I mean, it's completely false. It's true as far as the time frame and some of the things that happened, but it was called Hell on Wheels. It was an AMC show, and it was about the western expansion of the railroads.
Yeah.
And the natives were portrayed as like defenders of themselves.
Okay.
Like they were always on the defense, basically.
They're always on the run, mostly.
Well, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
And and I'm sure you've seen the picture. It's the woman that has the 3 tattoos right here.
Yeah.
That woman's was put into the show as one of the main characters.
She was captured by a tribe. That's what that tattoo is from.
Yeah. But like that, a variation of that woman's character or real life was put into the show.
Yeah.
But that always felt like they never portrayed them poorly. Unlike most other times, you would have Native Americans are always savages. And
well, you have, and you have this other thing going on. All right, you ever seen A Man Called Horse?
Mm-mm.
Okay, you want to check this one out only for its craziness. Is that it's Richard Crenna, I believe, or maybe English actor. I think that's right, but I could be wrong. Anyways, early 70s movie, maybe late 60s.
Mm-hmm.
Again, this guy's like captured. He ends up, being, a slave basically of this tribe, and he works himself up from slave to end up becoming like chief of the tribe. It's almost like Lawrence of Arabia type bullshit, right? But there's this one horrific scene where they like take these eagle claws on like ropes and hook him to his nipples, basically his chest, and like hoist him up in the air. By this. Now, this is long before, like, this shit got cool in the 90s, when people started hanging themselves by hooks. They're doing it by, like, eagle claws, in the late 60s, early 70s when this movie was out. So as a kid, I remember seeing this and going, like, oh, my eyes bugging out of my head. My grandfather let me watch all sorts of gory shit.
Your grandfather's cool.
But
Hey, mine turned me on to James Bond and pro wrestling. So,
well, that's awesome. Those two. My grandfather had Dr. Butcher on. I mean, that's some crazy shit. But that type of movie was the typical like fantasy of what happens. The white man gets adopted by the tribe, then he ends up the chief of the tribe. It's the same story as Tarzan. Tarzan gets adopted by apes, he ends up king of the apes, right? This is the friggin' Kevin Costner movie, Dances with Wolves, right? They joke about that one. That one has been called the Lawrence of the Plains type thing with the Lawrence Arabia shit, because what happens, he goes out there and they actually show him like trying to show them how to shoot guns and stuff.
Yeah.
And how to fight. And that's a huge insult to a tribe that was known for its fierceness in battle. That, it wasn't until Lieutenant Dan over there showed up and, showed it's, I mean, it was beautifully scored. And then the other thing that I've heard, a lot of people make fun of, and I remember it too, I remember when I was working in the theater when that movie first came out. When they show him, he's hanging out with the tribe more and more. And then all of a sudden they bring they introduce the woman to him, right? The one he's going to end up involved with. Well, how come it's not a native woman? It's the one white woman in the tribe, and she's filthy. There's like dirt on her face. She looks all crappy and everything else.
Well, they don't want inbreeding.
And then they bring her in, the way they've got her made up, I've heard somebody said she looked like, Wilma Flintstone, or Betty Rubble or something like that.
Kind of, yeah.
It was just ridiculous. It was an insult, a real insult. If you were to intermarry into a tribe, you marry into the tribe. You're not going to be like, hey, we got another honky over here. Let's put these two together.
Right.
It's not like they're like matchmakers, and that woman would have been sitting there alone the entire time. Or I guess the story, I forget now that I think back on the story, was that she had actually lost to her husband, and so it was, to remarry kind of thing. But
right.
I don't know.
Yeah, because I didn't want to see that her husband was one of the warriors that got killed.
Yeah, something to that effect. But
I know we could be completely wrong. I haven't seen the movie in 20 years.
Yeah, it's been a long time, but that movie's not a...
Well, I guess that's not true. I did see the Blue Alien movie.
What's the Blue Alien movie?
The James Cameron one that made all the money.
Oh, that stupid thing.
It's basically the same film.
It is the same movie, isn't it?
It's 100% the same film.
Well, everybody needs a white savior to go in and, show these native people how to fight. And it's such a predictable
I was sitting here trying to think of other shows that have had, and that may be positive, but actual indigenous, Native American, whatever you want to call them, people kind of play regulars. And the two that are coming to mind.
Hawaii Five-0. Had Native Hawaiians in the old Hawaii Five-0, the old one.
Oh, the new one too. Yeah, I watched that. I know the new one. Longmire.
Yeah.
The show Longmire from the graphic novels had tons of, and then the Yellowstone, the one that actually the Kevin Costner. Now it is very much a Dallas type show, so it's you kind of just take away the evil corporate tribal chief guy that's basically a killer. They have a bunch of people playing what they should be playing. They don't have white dudes playing Asians.
There's a great documentary.
Mickey Rooney.
There's a great documentary. I wish I could remember the name of right now. And it's about Native Americans 100 years in American cinema. Basically, it's all presence, because some of the earliest of Edison's recordings were actually of Native Americans, and so they show how back during that time it was when the slaughter of them, there were very few of them left. They had been driven into these small reservations, and disease had wiped out God knows how many. And by this point in time, they were no longer a threat. And so the generation, who during the quote unquote Indian wars that had wiped them out, well, their children like started to romanticize the Native American, and so that the myth, the whole noble savage thing, and that type of thing started becoming popular. And you could see just in not only in movies but in architecture that people started to use like the Native American as a symbol. We put it on money. We had buffalo nickels and things like this.
It's a bison nickel,
right? Well. Yeah.
Okay. My biggest pet peeve on the planet.
Yeah.
There's no buffalo in North America. The only buffalo are in Asia and Africa. End of conversation.
Well, then technically, and we know they're not Indians either. Because Indians are from India.
Yeah.
But it's after watching westerns my entire life.
Yeah.
And I mean Buffalo, New York. What's that all about?
It's Bison, New York.
Shut up. It's Bison, New York.
There are two kinds of buffaloes.
You better never show your face in Bison, New York.
There are North American and European buffaloes, and that's it.
Well, let's go to
Bison.
What about that racist restaurant, Bison Wild Wings?
It's what it should be called.
Yeah.
I Twittered them that the other day. They were not happy with me.
They didn't like that.
Nope.
So, I forget where the hell I was.
We were talking about just random shit now. But yeah, I mean, I think we're at a point too now where the indigenous, at least North Americans, or whatever you want to call it, are starting to get a little respect.
I think they've gotten a ton of respect since the 1970s. I think
it started to grow in the 70s, but I think now it's to a point where
I think it's in the 60s. This crazy thing started to happen is that everybody started to grow their hair long and put headbands on, and I don't think that was a coincidence.
Ponytails.
I think because these hippies of the 60s were children of the 50s,
right?
And after watching all of these westerns and everything else, and like I said, you had the Indian motorcycle, you had the bison nickels, you had all this these representations, this symbolism that's very symbol. The essence of the Native American meant free or wild or untamed, And so after growing up in that restricted 50s thing, you wanted to break free. And so what better way than grow your hair long like an Indian, like a Native American?
Well, look at Willie Nelson. He's had a ponytail for.
He's been wearing
80 of his 100
for
80 of the 100 years he's been alive,
and headband, the whole bit. So it's that has been the appropriation of somebody else's culture. In many ways, even though very few tribes actually used headbands.
No,
but certainly the long hair. But then again, back in the 1800s, like Custer's ass and some of these other guys, Hickok and they grew their hair long as a bravery thing, almost daring, daring themselves to be scalped.
Right.
But I told you, we've talked about that before and how much of a myth that was in a lot of ways. I mean, it did happen, but
it's the reverse.
It was mostly the reverse. They said the walls of England and people's homes in the 1800s in England especially were covered with Native American scalps. It was like the cool decorator piece to have if you were a Victorian person, along with some mummies from Egypt. You'd have to have some Native American scalps. Brits were some creepy people, and so
this is 2 weeks in a row we've talked about creepy Brits,
right? Yeah, well, they did conquer the world, that little island that conquered the world, and created a lot of mayhem in the process. So, well, we've talked a lot about the history of the Native American, although we haven't even scratched the surface of it. Obviously,
I think this is the moral of today's story: is that Thanksgiving is all bullshit. Yeah. Any story you've ever heard is a lie and bullshit.
So have a good time. Enjoy your family. At the same time, be culturally sensitive and don't go through the day not knowing the reality of the whole situation.
Don't think we shared food with the natives or the indigenous at the time like they said we did.
No, no. No, unfortunately, it was not a peaceful transition of power.
You know, and that goes all the way up to even good old Honest Abe hanging 40 of them in Minnesota.
Yeah, there's the Mankota 38, largest mass hanging in U.S. history. And that was a compromise. It was supposed to be 307.
Yeah, 307, yeah.
Just craziness. And then afterwards, after they hung them, they the ropes that were used to hang them were cut into pieces and sold off as souvenirs. So it just shows you what kind of world just 100 years ago, you know, that we were 150 years ago that we were living in, where you had public executions on a regular basis, and you could sell souvenirs from them. It was just
be like now if it was still a thing, they'd have T-shirts.
Well, you're right. Everybody talks about the Romans, you know, oh, you're feeding Christians to the lions, the Colosseum, blood sports, all these kind of things. It's like, you just go back 100 years, and they were doing that same crap here.
Mm-hmm.
They were feeding people to animals. There was blood sport. There was bear baiting, bull baiting, dog fighting. Also, there's still dog fighting, unfortunately. Just the most horrific acts of humanity are only a few generations back. It's not that far back. You know, even the greatest generation, which is the World War II generation, the ones that grew up from the Depression and all that.
Right.
They're my grandparents' generation. I'm really familiar with their thought process.
Mm-hmm.
In a lot of ways, they're the greatest generation. In a lot of ways, they're fucked up.
Right.
Some of the stories, my grandfather doesn't sugarcoat shit. And
a friend of mine's grandfather, who, let's say he's 85, was here visiting up until the weekend. And I've known him my whole life because my buddy and I have been friends.
Yeah.
So you got to figure he's an 85-year-old man. He's been through everything since the 1930s, and we were kind of briefly talking. And I said, "What was it like being in the military in the early 1950s?" And he said it was like being a black man in Georgia in the 1840s or the 1850s. I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Other than getting paid, I was a slave, and I was treated like one." I said, "How long did you serve in the military?" He goes, 10 years. I said, "Why did you do 10 years?" He goes, "Back then, I guess you could retire."
Yeah. Really?
Or 10? Or maybe you got more money once you got out. I don't remember what it was that he said. So, and I said, "Okay." And he goes, then the 60s hit. And everyone was happy-go-lucky, and they wanted me to have rights all of a sudden. That's just like one of those things where the only thing he thinks is weird is he told me, I would rather be called colored than black.
Yeah.
And I said, "What?" He goes, "No, I don't like that." He goes, "Just call me colored."
So he is colored?
Yeah, he's a black man. They're black.
So he's of that generation, that NAACP generation.
But he doesn't. He's I hate when people say I'm black.
Yeah. Hey, whatever you prefer being called, you know.
But I just love. I was like, that nobody else says that. He goes, "Oh, I know."
Yeah. No, I imagine.
But that's why he was saying, I felt like it was.
That totally makes sense now.
Yeah,
I'm thinking.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I thought I didn't mention he was black, but yeah.
No, well, because at first I'm thinking, I'm like, Michael Vernon was in World War II.
Yeah.
So heard his stories, and obviously boot camp is hell for everybody. But once you're at a boot camp, it's, normally an okay experience.
Yep.
Battle, and, horror and that stuff aside.
Right. Well, so.
But
I don't know why anyone would. He's still at 85. He's 6. God, he's got to be like 6'6".
Yeah.
Like, he's a big man. So he was a big target, but he was a big man back then.
George next door is 84.
Yeah.
I think he might be turning 85. He's turning 85 in March, I think.
Okay.
So, yeah, I'm glad that they're still around. Unfortunately, not many of them left.
No, I tell everyone, especially when you're my age or our age, you got your grandparents around, you're lucky, because I lost mine all at
in the 80s.
Before the 90s, or before the... My grandparents all passed away 87, 91, 99, and Valentine's Day 2000. So that's how long I had my grandparents around for.
I want to say 84, 96, and like 2008.
So, okay.
2009, something like that. And then my grandfather's
Still kicking.
still kicking.
How old is he?
He's 84, I think. I think he's 84. 83 or 84. He's, but he's had bladder cancer.
Right.
He's had, other things chopped off and stuff like that. He's, had 20 some odd treatments of that, that terrible bladder cancer treatment. So, I mean, he's a tough old bird. It's, not to mention 4 stints, in his heart and everything else you can imagine, but it's, he's that old German English, stock, and they,
he could get with a tank and he'd be all right.
It's amazing. That's, ridiculously, strong genes.
Yeah.
But I joke, if you go look at historically speaking, it's for most of us to have been here, it means our ancestors would have had to survive every plague up until now.
Yeah.
And they say, like currently, 11 to 15% of the European population is immune to HIV. There's always going to be at least 2 to 10% of the population that will survive any epidemic, any disease outbreak, any mass flu. So if it comes down to the, like the flus of the past, or what do they call the influenza, wiping out 3/4 of the population, there's always going to be that 1/4 or maybe a little less that's going to survive. It's our genes will literally mutate in order to
survive.
Yeah. And so that means everybody who is the children of those survivors inherits those, stronger genes. And that's exactly why when the Europeans first came over here to the United States, the native people here had no immunities.
Right.
One of the biggest reasons is because we had 30,000 years of domesticating animals in Europe and, the Middle East. And so when you're with animals for that long, you start to share each other's diseases and immunities. And so things like smallpox and chickenpox,
right,
smallpox comes from cowpox, I believe, and so on and so forth. And so these immunities that we, built up because of our close proximity to animals, they didn't have cows,
right,
and they didn't have horses. Horses came with the Spanish. So all these things that we brought over with us, it ended up backfiring and wiping them out. And they didn't need cows, and they didn't need, pigs to be brought over here, or even horses, really. No. They were more well fed than the Europeans of their time period. The water was cleaner here. There were more things like turkeys. Right. There were no turkeys, over in England.
No.
You had plenty of wildfowl, plenty of deer. Buffalo supposedly where herds were so large that it would take days for them to pass a certain area. So it was in a land of
bison.
Bison. It was in a land of abundance.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest agricultural breakthroughs in the history of mankind was actually done by Native Americans, and that is the corn.
Oh yeah.
Because supposedly corn came from something like that small, and they turned it into the ears of corn that we have today. I think it started in South America, but that's still that's native.
Yeah, they figured out how to survive.
Yeah, a lot of things. So, anyways, we kind of went all over the place. We tried to keep it on the same theme.
It's all about the Native Americans, the indigenous.
Yeah, and I apologize for what my ancestors have done for the last 300 plus years that my mother's family was in this country.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's 1673 is when when mine landed. And I know they did wrong. They bought the northern part of New Jersey for like a wagon full of crap from the natives. So it's, yeah.
I want to say it was sometime during the British-American War was when we snuck over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's, yeah. Anyways, like I said, my mother's side of the family goes way back.
And it's funny as that through all these, history of your family is, I found out recently that my favorite city on the West Coast was the town that most of the family landed in.
San Francisco?
Portland.
Portland. Wow. I have no idea the history of Portland, Oregon.
It's the #1 city in the world for women being kidnapped.
Really?
Uh-huh.
Oh, that sounds like an episode for next week.
That's next week. Well, yeah.
All right.
Next week when this airs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the week after Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Okay, everybody. Thanks for watching with us again. We really appreciate it. Make sure you click like, and if you're not a subscriber, please subscribe. I think we're at like 98 subscribers right now.
Oh, we get to 100 before the end of the year.
Would love to make it to 100 before the end of the year. Thank you for the last like 15 subscribers. I think that was almost in one day, and that was I think mostly as a result of that
Crime Con
the True Crime Mini Con at the Sacramento Library that just happened recently. We got to show a few of our videos there, and that was a great event. So,
well, everyone have a great Thanksgiving. Enjoy your friends and family. Don't shoot, stab, kill.
Yeah, let's make it let's make it a peaceful Thanksgiving, so this episode holds up, and there's not some terrible crap going on that we completely didn't talk about because we filmed this in advance.
And also survive Black Friday the best you can.
Just stay home.
And they're bison, not buffalo.
Yeah.
I'm out.